Can't sleep again? That's okay. You don't have to force anything right now. Nights like this are easier when you've got a little company. So lie back, listen to the rain outside, and let me share 5 slow, calming stories until you feel yourself drift. Story 1. The closet door that never stayed shut. When I was 7 years old, I begged my parents to let me switch bedrooms with my older brother. I told them it was because his room was bigger, because it had 2 windows instead of 1, because the morning light was better. I made up a dozen reasons, each one more creative than the last, because I couldn't tell them the truth. I couldn't explain that I was afraid of my closet. It sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. A closet. A small rectangular space with a wooden door and a rod for hanging clothes. There was nothing remarkable about it, just painted drywall and carpet and the faint smell of cedar from the blocks my mother kept on the shelf to ward off moths. But that closet terrified me in a way I've never been able to fully articulate, even now, 23 years later. It wasn't what was inside that scared me. It was the door. The door never stayed shut. I'd close it every night before bed, pushing it firmly until I heard the latch click into place. I'd even started putting my desk chair in front of it, wedging the back under the handle like I'd seen people do in movies. But every morning when I woke up, the door would be open. Not all the way, just a few inches, just enough to create a thin, vertical slice of darkness that seemed to watch me from across the room. I'd lie in bed staring at that gap, my covers pulled up to my chin, absolutely certain that something was looking back. My parents thought I was being dramatic. My brother thought I was being a baby. The house was old, they told me. The foundation had settled. The door frame was probably warped, and the latch didn't catch properly. Dad even took the door off its hinges one weekend and shaved down the edges, rehung it, tested it a dozen times. Fixed, he announced proudly. That night, I closed the door, heard it click, and went to sleep feeling safe for the first time in months. By morning, it was open again. I never did switch rooms. I learned to live with it instead, the way children learn to live with all sorts of things they can't control. I stopped putting the chair against the door because it didn't help. I stopped complaining because no one believed me. I just accepted that the closet door would be open every morning, and I trained myself not to look at it, not to think about what might be standing in that darkness, waiting. When I left for college at 18, I felt like I was escaping. I told myself I'd never live in that house again. But life has a way of breaking the promises you make to yourself. My mother died in April, quickly and without warning, a stroke that took her between one heartbeat and the next. She was 64 years old, still working part-time at the library, still tending her vegetable garden, still calling me every Sunday to ask about my life and tell me about hers. And then she was gone, and I was driving back to my hometown for the first time in 3 years, trying to figure out how to bury a woman who had seemed immortal. My father had passed 5 years earlier, and my brother lived in Seattle with his wife and kids. That left me to handle the estate, to sort through decades of accumulated belongings, to decide what to keep and what to donate and what to throw away. The house was mine now, or it would be, once the paperwork cleared. A 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet street, worth more than I'd make in 5 years at my nonprofit job. My brother didn't want it, said he had too many memories there, that it would be too painful. So it fell to me. I told myself I'd stay a week, 2 at most, just long enough to get the house ready for sale, to box up the important things and arrange for someone to handle the rest. I booked a hotel room downtown, determined to keep a professional distance from the whole process. I wasn't going to sleep in that house. I wasn't going to stay there after dark. I wasn't going to set foot in my old bedroom if I could help it. That plan lasted exactly 2 days. The hotel was expensive, and I was already hemorrhaging money on funeral costs and estate lawyers and all the other expenses that come with death. The house was sitting there empty, fully furnished, with running water and electricity. It made sense to stay there. It was the practical choice. And besides, I was 30 years old now. I had a master's degree and a career and an apartment in the city with my name on the lease. I wasn't afraid of a closet anymore. I moved my suitcase into my old bedroom on a Thursday evening when the last light of spring was fading from the sky and the house was settling into its familiar creaks and groans. The room looked smaller than I remembered. They always do when you come back as an adult. But it was clean and neat. The bed made with fresh sheets my mother must have put on before she died. I set my bag on the dresser and turned to face the closet. The door was closed. White paint, brass handle, the same as it had always been. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something, a feeling, a memory, a surge of childhood terror. But there was nothing, just a door, just a closet. I actually laughed at myself, a short exhale of relief, and went downstairs to make dinner. That night, I closed the closet door before bed. I heard the latch click into place. I didn't put a chair against it. That would have been ridiculous, an admission that some part of me still believed. I just turned off the light and climbed under the covers and lay there in the darkness, listening to the rain that had started falling outside, tapping gently against the window. I was almost asleep when I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible over the rain. Click. I opened my eyes. Across the room, in the thin gray light filtering through the curtains, I could see the closet door. It was open. Just a few inches, just enough to create that thin vertical slice of darkness I remembered so well. And this time, I was absolutely certain something was looking back. I didn't move. I don't know how long I lay there, minutes, maybe, or hours, just staring at that gap in the door, my body rigid under the covers, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get up, to turn on the light, to prove to myself that there was nothing there. But I couldn't. I was 7 years old again, frozen in place, waiting for something to emerge from that darkness. Nothing did. Eventually, the gray light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, and the spell broke. I got up, crossed the room on unsteady legs, and pulled the closet door open all the way. Empty. Just my old clothes still hanging on the rod. Things I'd left behind when I moved out. A box of high school yearbooks on the floor. Dust motes floating in the early morning light. I stood there feeling foolish, feeling angry at myself for letting childhood fears crawl back into my head. The house was old. The door frame was warped. Dad had tried to fix it 20 years ago, and apparently it hadn't taken. Mystery solved. I went downstairs and made coffee, then sat at the kitchen table watching the sun come up over the backyard. The vegetable garden my mother had loved was overgrown now, tomato cages rusting, weeds pushing up through the mulch. I'd have to deal with that eventually, add it to the list. That day, I threw myself into work. I sorted through the hall closet, bagging up old coats for donation. I cleaned out the pantry, tossing expired cans and stale cereal. I called the estate lawyer to check on the paperwork and scheduled an appraiser to come look at the furniture. Physical tasks, practical tasks, things that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. By the time evening came, I'd almost convinced myself that the night before had been nothing but exhaustion and grief playing tricks on me. I closed the closet door before bed, heard it click, didn't think about it. At 3:17 a.m., I know the exact time because I looked at my phone, I woke to the sound of the latch releasing. That soft, distinct click that's different from every other sound a house makes. I didn't want to look. I kept my eyes closed, kept my breathing steady, told myself I was dreaming, but I wasn't dreaming. And when I finally opened my eyes, the door was open again. Same gap, same darkness, same feeling of being watched. This time I got up. I was angry now, more than scared. Angry at this stupid door, angry at my own fear, angry at the universe for making me deal with this on top of everything else. I crossed the room and grabbed the handle and pulled the door wide open, ready to shout at the empty space behind it like a crazy person. It wasn't empty. There was something on the back wall of the closet. Something that hadn't been there that morning. I was sure of it. I fumbled for the light switch, flicked it on, and stood blinking in the sudden brightness. Scratches. deep gouges in the drywall, running in vertical lines from about waist height almost to the ceiling, like something had been clawing at the wall, like something had been trying to get out. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. The scratches looked old. The edges were soft, the exposed drywall yellowed with age. But I'd never seen them before. I'd lived in this room for 11 years, and I'd never noticed marks like this on the back wall of my closet. Had they always been hidden behind the clothes? Had my mother hung something over them after I left? I pushed aside the old jackets and dresses, looking for any sign that the scratches had been covered up. Nothing. Just bare wall, gouged and scarred, like a wound that had never healed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with every light on, wrapped in a blanket, watching bad infomercials until the sun came up. When it was late enough to be reasonable, I called my brother. "Do you remember anything weird about my old bedroom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "When we were kids?" He was quiet for a moment. "You mean the closet thing?" "Yeah, the closet thing. I remember you were scared of it, used to beg Mom and Dad to let you switch rooms." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "I always thought you were just being dramatic. Did you ever notice anything? The door opening on its own, or..." What's going on? Are you okay?" I almost told him. Almost described the scratches, the feeling of being watched, the absolute certainty that something was wrong. But I could hear the concern in his voice, the worry that his little sister was losing it under the stress of settling their mother's estate. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be the crazy one. "I'm fine," I said. "Just being nostalgic, I guess. Old memories." After we hung up, I went back upstairs. The closet door was closed. I'd shut it before coming downstairs, and this time it had stayed put. I stood in the doorway of my old bedroom for a long moment, then made a decision. I needed to know what was behind that wall. The hardware store opened at 8. I was there at 8:05, buying a flashlight and a drywall saw. The kid at the register gave me a look, a woman in yesterday's clothes with dark circles under her eyes, buying demolition tools. But I was past caring what anyone thought. Back at the house, I pushed all the clothes aside and knelt in front of the scratches. Up close, they looked even more deliberate. Not random damage, a pattern, like fingers dragging downward, over and over, wearing grooves into the wall. I positioned the saw and started cutting. The drywall came away easier than I expected. It was old, brittle, crumbling at the edges as I cut through it. Dust filled the air, coating my hands and my clothes, getting into my nose and throat. I didn't care. I just kept cutting, following the outline of the scratches until I had a hole about 2 feet wide. Behind the drywall was another wall, older. Wooden planks, darkened with age, nailed together in a rough pattern that looked nothing like modern construction. I shined my flashlight into the gap between the walls and saw a narrow space, maybe 8 inches deep, running the full height of the closet. Too small for a person, too small for anything, really. But there was something in there. I reached in, my hand trembling, and my fingers closed around fabric. I pulled it out slowly, carefully, and found myself holding a child's dress. Small, faded, the kind of thing a girl might have worn 100 years ago. It was filthy, covered in dust and cobwebs, but I could still see the pattern, little blue flowers on white cotton with a lace collar that had yellowed with age. I set it aside and reached in again. This time I pulled out a shoe. A single leather shoe, cracked and stiff, sized for a child no older than 5 or 6. Then a wooden toy, a little horse on wheels with most of its paint worn away. Then something else, a bundle of papers, tied together with a ribbon that disintegrated at my touch. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by these artifacts, my heart hammering in my chest. Someone had put these things here. Someone had hidden them behind a wall, sealed them away in the darkness, and left them to be forgotten. The papers were letters. I handled them carefully, afraid they'd crumble, but the ink was still legible. faded to brown, but readable if I squinted. They were written in a child's handwriting, uneven and clumsy, addressed to Mama and Papa. "I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Please let me out. It's dark in here. I don't like the dark. I can hear them walking outside. Why won't they open the door?" I put the letters down. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold them steady anymore. I understood now. I understood what the scratches meant, what the dress and the shoe and the little wooden horse meant. A child had been in this space. A child had been locked in the darkness, had clawed at the walls trying to get out, had written letters begging to be released. A child had died here. I don't remember leaving the closet. I don't remember walking downstairs or sitting on the front porch or calling my brother back. I just remember his voice on the phone, asking me what was wrong, and my own voice answering in words that didn't feel like mine. "There's something in the walls. Someone put a little girl in the walls." He drove down that night, 5 hours from Seattle, straight through, arriving at the house a little after midnight. I was still sitting on the porch when his headlights swept across the yard, and when he got out of the car, I saw the fear in his face. Not fear of what I'd found, fear for me, fear that grief had broken something in his little sister's mind. But then I showed him. I took him upstairs, showed him the hole I'd cut in the closet, showed him the dress and the shoe and the letters. I watched his face change as he read the words that child had written, watched the skepticism drain away and something else take its place. "Jesus," he whispered. "Em, what the hell is this?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." The next 3 days were a blur of research. We went to the Town Historical Society, the library, the county records office. We dug through archives and old newspapers and census records, piecing together the history of our house one fragment at a time. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. The house was built in 1891 by a family named Holbrook. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. The girl's name was Clara. She was born in 1886 and died in 1892 at the age of 6. The cause of death was listed as fever, but there was no record of a doctor's visit, no funeral notice, no grave in the town cemetery. Clara Holbrook had simply ceased to exist. We found one photograph of her, buried in the Historical Society's collection. A formal portrait, the kind families used to have taken at studios. Clara was standing between her brothers, wearing a white dress with a lace collar and little blue flowers, the same dress I'd pulled from the wall. She wasn't smiling. Her eyes were wide and dark and terrified, fixed on something just beyond the camera. Her brothers looked normal, composed, but Clara looked like she was screaming without making a sound. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Then I went back to the house and stood in front of my old closet, looking at the hole I'd cut, thinking about a little girl locked in the darkness over 100 years ago, writing letters no one would ever read, scratching at the walls until her fingers bled, dying alone in the dark, while her family walked past the door and pretended she didn't exist. That night, I didn't close the closet door. I left it open all the way, letting light spill into that small space where Clara had spent her last days, and I said her name out loud. "Clara, I know you're here. I know what happened to you." The house was silent. The rain had stopped hours ago, and the night was perfectly still. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry no one came for you." And then, so faint I almost missed it, I heard a sound from inside the closet. A child crying. My brother heard it too. I saw his face go pale in the dim light, saw him take a step backward like he wanted to run, but neither of us moved. We just stood there, listening to the soft, hitching sobs coming from somewhere inside the closet, from inside the walls, from the space where Clara Holbrook had spent her final days. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then it faded, like a radio signal drifting out of range, until there was nothing but silence and the pounding of my own heart. "We need to leave," my brother said. His voice was hoarse. "Em, we need to get out of this house right now." but I couldn't. Something was holding me there, rooted to the spot, and it wasn't fear. It was something else, a feeling I couldn't name, a pull toward that dark space behind the wall. She was 6 years old, I said. She died in there, alone, and no one ever came for her. No one even acknowledged she existed. That was over 100 years ago. There's nothing we can do about it now. We can find out the truth. We can make sure people know what happened. My brother left the next morning. He hugged me on the front porch and made me promise to call him every day, to let him know I was okay. I could tell he thought I was making a mistake by staying. Maybe he was right. But I couldn't leave Clara. Not yet. Not until I understood. I dove deeper into the research. The Holbrooks had been a prominent family in town, wealthy, respected, pillars of the community. The father, William, had owned a textile mill. The mother, Harriet, had been active in the church. Their 2 sons had grown up to be successful businessmen, had married, had children of their own. But Clara had vanished from the historical record at age 6, nothing but a single line in the census and that one terrified photograph. I found the answer in the church archives. Buried in a ledger of baptisms and marriages and deaths, there was a note from the pastor in 1892, a private entry, not meant for public eyes. Visited the Holbrook home today at Mrs. Holbrook's request. She is distressed about the child Clara. Says the girl is touched, speaks to things that aren't there, flies into rages, cannot be controlled. Mr. Holbrook wants to send her to the asylum in Brenton, but Mrs. Holbrook refuses. She fears what people will say. I counseled prayer and patience. May God have mercy on that poor child. There was another entry 3 months later. Clara Holbrook has died. Mrs. Holbrook says it was a fever. I did not ask questions. Some burdens are too heavy to share. I sat in the church basement with that ledger in my hands, reading those words over and over. Clara hadn't been locked away because she was bad. She'd been locked away because she was different, because she saw things, heard things, experienced the world in ways her parents couldn't understand. And rather than send her to an asylum where people might find out, they'd hidden her in the walls of their own home and let her die. They'd let their 6-year-old daughter die in the dark. And then they'd covered it up, pretended she'd never existed, and gone on with their respectable lives. That night, I went back to the closet. I'd left the hole in the wall open, hadn't tried to cover it up or seal it away. The dress and the shoe and the wooden horse were still sitting on my old bedroom floor, artifacts of a life that had been erased. I sat down in front of the opening and turned off my flashlight. The darkness was absolute, pressing against my eyes, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old childhood terror. But I pushed through it. Clara, I said softly, I found out what happened to you. I know what they did. Silence. They were wrong. What they did was evil, and they were wrong, and you didn't deserve any of it. The air in the closet changed. I can't explain it better than that. It got colder, heavier, like the pressure before a storm. I could feel something in that darkness with me, not malevolent, not threatening, just present, waiting. I'm going to tell people, I said. I'm going to make sure everyone knows you existed, that you mattered, that you were real. A sound, so soft I almost missed it. Not crying this time. A sigh, long and slow and impossibly sad. And then the cold lifted. The pressure eased. The darkness felt like ordinary darkness again, just the absence of light, nothing more. I sat there for a long time, tears streaming down my face, grieving for a little girl I'd never met. A little girl who'd been so desperate to be seen that she'd kept opening that closet door for over a century, night after night, trying to get someone, anyone, to notice she was there. The next morning, I called the local newspaper, then the Historical Society, then a professor at the State University who specialized in Victorian-era child welfare. I told them everything I'd found, the hidden space, the artifacts, the letters, the church records. I gave them Clara's name and Clara's photograph and Clara's story. Within a week, it was everywhere. Local news picked it up first, then regional outlets, then national. The girl in the walls, they called her. People sent flowers to the house, left teddy bears on the porch, wrote letters to a child who'd been dead for over 100 years. A memorial fund was established in Clara's name to support children with mental illness. The Holbrook family, what remained of them, descendants who'd never known the truth, issued a formal apology. Clara Holbrook finally existed, finally mattered, finally had proof that she'd been real. And the closet door stopped opening on its own. I stayed in that house for another month, partly to finish settling my mother's estate, partly because I wasn't ready to leave. Something had shifted in me during those weeks. Some wall I'd built between my childhood and my adult self had come down, and I needed time to figure out what that meant. The closet didn't scare me anymore. I'd had a contractor come in and repair the wall, seal up the space where Clara had been hidden for so long. But before they closed it, I did something that probably seemed strange to everyone watching. I placed a small bouquet of wildflowers inside, along with a note. For Clara, you are not forgotten. The contractor gave me a look but didn't say anything. I think by then the whole town knew the story, knew what had been found in the walls of the old Holbrook house, because that's what people were calling it now, even though my family had owned it for 40 years. It would always be the Holbrook house. It would always be Clara's house. I thought a lot about my mother during those weeks. She'd lived in that house for decades, had walked past that closet thousands of times, had probably heard the door click open in the middle of the night just like I had. Had she known? Had she sensed something wrong and chosen not to look too closely? Or had she, like my father, simply written it off as a quirk of an old house, a door that didn't latch properly, nothing to worry about, I'll never know. She's gone, and I can't ask her. But I like to think she felt something. I like to think that on some level, she knew a little girl was trapped in those walls, waiting to be found. And maybe that's why she kept my old bedroom exactly the way it was, even after I moved out. Maybe she was waiting for someone to come back and do what she couldn't bring herself to do. Or maybe I'm just telling myself stories. That's what we do, isn't it? We construct narratives that make sense of the senseless, that give meaning to things that might not have any meaning at all. Maybe my mother never thought twice about that closet. Maybe the door really was just warped, but the door doesn't open anymore. Not since I spoke Clara's name, told her story, made the world acknowledge that she existed. That has to mean something. I sold the house in June. I couldn't keep it. Too many memories, too much history, too much weight pressing down on every room. A young couple bought it, newlyweds excited about their first home. I told them the story before they signed the papers, showed them the news articles, the memorial page that had been set up in Clara's name. They listened with wide eyes and thanked me for being honest. "We'll take care of her," the woman said, and I believed her. The money from the sale was more than I expected, enough to pay off my student loans, enough to put a down payment on a small condo in the city, enough to donate a significant amount to the Clara Holbrook Memorial Fund. It felt right, using that money to help children like her, children who were different, who saw the world in ways others couldn't understand, who needed protection instead of punishment. I still think about Clara. Not every day anymore, but often. I think about her in that darkness, writing letters no one would read, scratching at walls no one would open. I think about how close she came to being erased completely, how easily her story could have been lost forever if I hadn't smelled cedar in a closet, hadn't noticed a door that wouldn't stay shut. She was 6 years old. She liked flowers. I know that from the dress she wore in the photograph. She had a wooden horse on wheels that she probably pulled behind her through the halls of that big house before everything went wrong. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's child, and for over a century, no one remembered her name. I remember it now. I'll remember it for the rest of my life. Sometimes, when I'm falling asleep in my new condo with its modern closets and doors that latch properly, I think I hear something. a faint sound, like a child laughing in another room. It's probably just the neighbors, or the building settling, or my imagination filling silence with meaning. But part of me hopes it's Clara. Part of me hopes she's finally free, finally at peace, finally able to be the little girl she never got to be, running through fields of wildflowers, playing with her wooden horse, laughing in the sunlight instead of crying in the dark. I was afraid of that closet for 23 years. I thought something terrible was hiding in there, something that wanted to hurt me. I was wrong. It wasn't something terrible. It was just a little girl who wanted to be found, and the real horror, the true horror, wasn't the ghost. It was the people who put her there, the parents who decided their reputation mattered more than their daughter's life, the community that looked the other way, the silence that lasted for over 100 years. That's the thing about ghost stories. We focus on the supernatural, the unexplained, the thing that goes bump in the night. But the scariest part is almost always human. The cruelty we're capable of. The things we do to each other. The secrets we bury in walls and hope no one ever finds. Clara found me. Or maybe I found her. Either way, her story isn't a secret anymore. If you ever move into an old house and a door won't stay shut, don't ignore it. Don't write it off as warped wood or settling foundations. Pay attention, listen. Look, someone might be trying to tell you something. Someone might have been waiting a very long time to be heard. Story 2. My laptop camera recorded a visitor. I only found out because my laptop glitched. That's the thing that keeps me up at night. If the software hadn't malfunctioned, if the camera hadn't started recording when it wasn't supposed to, I never would have known. I would have gone on, living my life, sleeping in my bed, eating at my kitchen table, completely unaware that someone else had been doing those same things when I wasn't home. Let me back up. I'm 28 years old, and at the time this happened, I was about 2 years into a PhD program in computer science. I lived alone in a small apartment near campus, 1 bedroom, a cramped kitchen, a living room that doubled as my office. It wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap and quiet and close enough to the lab that I could stumble home at 2 a.m. after a long coding session without worrying about a dangerous commute. I spent a lot of time at that lab. My research involved machine learning, specifically training AI models to recognize patterns in medical imaging. It was demanding work, the kind that ate hours without you noticing, and most weeks I was on campus 12 or 14 hours a day. I'd leave in the morning, come home at night, sleep, and do it all again. My apartment was basically just a place to crash between sessions. Because I was gone so much, I'd developed certain habits, routines that let me keep track of things even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. I always left my laptop on the kitchen table, plugged in, positioned the same way. I always made my bed before I left, even if I was running late. I always checked that the front door was locked, always closed the blinds, always put my dishes in the sink before heading out. Little rituals that gave me some sense of control over a life that often felt chaotic. The laptop was important. It was my personal machine, separate from the one I used in the lab, and I kept it at home specifically so I could work on side projects without being tethered to campus. I had a decent webcam built into the lid. Nothing fancy, just the standard 720p camera that comes with most laptops. I used it for video calls with my family, the occasional online meeting. Nothing special. Most of the time, I forgot it was even there. The glitch happened on a Tuesday. I'd been at the lab since early morning, wrestling with a particularly stubborn piece of code, and by the time I got home, it was almost 11 at night. I dropped my bag on the couch, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down at the kitchen table to check my email before bed. That's when I noticed the notification. My laptop had a feature I'd enabled months ago and mostly forgotten about, a security app that could detect motion through the webcam and start recording if it sensed movement while I was away. I'd installed it after reading some article about apartment break-ins near campus, figuring it couldn't hurt to have an extra layer of protection. The app ran in the background, barely used any resources, and I'd never once had it trigger. Until now. The notification said the camera had recorded 47 minutes of footage that afternoon. I frowned at the screen, confused. Maybe a shadow had moved across the room, or the sunlight had shifted in a way that triggered the motion sensor. I'd had false alarms before on other apps, a curtain moving in a draft, a reflection off a passing car. Nothing to worry about. I clicked on the file anyway, expecting to see an empty room. The video started playing, showing my kitchen from the laptop's point of view, the table, the edge of the counter, the window with its closed blinds letting in thin slats of afternoon light. Everything looked normal. I was about to close it when the door opened. Not my front door. The door to my bedroom, which was visible at the edge of the frame. And someone walked out. I sat there, beer forgotten in my hand, watching a stranger emerge from my bedroom. A man, maybe 40 or 50, wearing jeans and a dark sweater. He moved casually, comfortably, like he belonged there. He walked into the kitchen, opened my refrigerator, and stood there for a moment, looking inside. Then he took out the orange juice, my orange juice, poured himself a glass, and drank it while leaning against the counter. The video kept playing. The man finished his juice, rinsed the glass, and put it back in the cabinet. Then he walked over to my couch, sat down, and picked up the remote. I couldn't see the TV from the camera angle, but I could see him watching something for almost 20 minutes, his face occasionally lit by the flickering light of the screen. When he was done, he stood up, stretched, and walked back toward my bedroom. The door closed behind him. A few minutes later, the motion sensor stopped detecting movement, and the recording ended. I watched the whole thing without moving, without breathing, it felt like. Then I went back to the beginning and watched it again. The timestamp said 2:34 p.m. I'd been in the lab. I'd been on campus, completely oblivious, while a stranger drank my juice and watched my TV and walked in and out of my bedroom like he owned the place. I looked up from my laptop, looked at my bedroom door, which was closed now, exactly the way I'd left it that morning. Looked at the kitchen, at the cabinet where he'd put the glass, at the refrigerator where my orange juice sat on the top shelf. The apartment was silent. The rain that had started on my walk home was tapping against the windows, soft and steady, and somewhere in the building I could hear the muffled sound of a TV through the walls. My bedroom door was closed, but I hadn't opened it since I got home, which meant that if he'd gone in there on the video and never come back out on the video, he might still be inside. I didn't move. I sat at my kitchen table with my hand still wrapped around a beer that had gone warm, staring at my bedroom door like it might explode at any moment. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get out, to leave the apartment and call the police from somewhere safe. But another part, the stupid, stubborn part that had gotten me through years of grad school, was frozen in place, unable to process what I'd just seen. The door was maybe 15 feet away from me, closed. Silent. The same door I'd walked past when I came home. The same door I'd been casually ignoring for the last 20 minutes while I checked my email and drank my beer. If someone was behind it, they would have heard me come in. They would have heard me moving around the kitchen. They knew I was here, and they hadn't come out. That thought broke through the paralysis. I stood up slowly, quietly, and grabbed my phone from the table. My keys were by the front door. I could make it there in 5 steps. I could be out of the apartment and in the hallway in less than 10 seconds. I didn't take my eyes off the bedroom door as I moved. 1 step, 2. The floor creaked under my weight. It always creaked. These old apartments were nothing but creaky floors and thin walls, and I froze again, listening. Nothing. No sound from behind the door, no footsteps, no breathing, no indication that anyone was in there at all. 3 more steps and I was at the front door. I grabbed my keys, unlocked the deadbolt as quietly as I could, and slipped out into the hallway. Then I ran. I called 911 from the stairwell, my voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself twice. Someone in my apartment. I have video. He might still be there. They told me to wait outside. that officers were on their way, that I should not go back in under any circumstances. I stood on the sidewalk in front of my building, rain soaking through my jacket, watching my windows on the third floor for any sign of movement. The police arrived in about 8 minutes. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both of them calm and professional in a way that made me feel slightly hysterical by comparison. I showed them the video on my phone. I'd already sent myself a copy, some instinct for evidence kicking in, and watched their expressions change as they saw the man walk out of my bedroom. "Stay here," the female officer said. "We'll clear the apartment." I waited on the sidewalk for what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes. When they came back down, their faces were unreadable. "There's no one in the apartment," the male officer told me. "We checked everywhere, closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. It's empty." Empty. The word should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Because if he wasn't there now, that meant he'd left at some point. Walked right past my laptop, out my front door, and disappeared into the world. Which meant he had a key, which meant he could come back whenever he wanted. "There's something else," the female officer said. She hesitated, exchanging a look with her partner. "Your bedroom window was unlocked. It leads to the fire escape." I felt my stomach drop. I always locked that window. Always. But I also always locked my front door, and clearly that hadn't kept him out. Maybe the window was how he got in, or how he got out, or both. They took my statement, took a copy of the video, told me they'd look into it. They gave me the number for a locksmith who could come out tonight, suggested I stay somewhere else if I could. Then they left, and I was standing alone on the wet sidewalk, staring up at my apartment windows and wondering how long this had been going on. Because that was the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. The man in the video, he'd moved through my apartment like he knew it. He'd known exactly where the glasses were, hadn't hesitated when he opened the refrigerator, had walked straight to the couch and picked up the remote like he'd done it 100 times before. That wasn't the behavior of someone breaking in for the first time. That was someone who had been there before, someone who was comfortable. I didn't sleep that night. I went to a friend's place, crashed on his couch, and spent the hours until dawn going through my laptop. The security app kept logs, motion detection events, recording timestamps, file sizes. I'd never really looked at them before. Now I scrolled through weeks of history, searching for anything I might have missed. I found it 3 weeks back. A recording I'd never noticed, flagged as a false alarm because it was only 12 seconds long. I clicked on it with trembling fingers. The video showed my empty apartment, same angle as before. And then, for just a moment, a shadow moved across the frame. A person, walking from the bedroom toward the front door. Too fast to see clearly, too brief to make out any details. But definitely a person. He'd been coming into my apartment for at least 3 weeks, maybe longer. Maybe the whole time I'd lived there. I thought about all those nights I'd come home late, exhausted, and gone straight to bed without checking anything. All those mornings I'd left for the lab at dawn, leaving my apartment empty for 12, 14, 16 hours at a stretch. All that time when someone could have been there, going through my things, sleeping in my bed, living a shadow life inside my own home. I went further back through the logs, found another recording from 6 weeks ago, another shadow, another brief glimpse of movement, and then another from 2 months back. He'd been doing this for months, coming and going as he pleased, careful to leave before I got home, careful not to disturb anything I might notice. If my laptop hadn't glitched, if that security app hadn't recorded longer than it should have, I would never have known. But now, I knew. And I had to find out who he was. I didn't go back to my apartment for 3 days. I stayed with my friend Marcus, borrowed clothes, worked from the lab, tried to function like a normal person while my mind kept circling back to the same questions. Who was he? How did he get in? What did he want? The police were looking into it, but I could tell it wasn't a priority. No one had been hurt. Nothing had been stolen. As far as they were concerned, it was just a weird break-in, Probably some homeless guy who'd figured out how to get onto the fire escape. They'd increased patrols in the area, they said. They'd let me know if they found anything. I wasn't going to wait for them. I'm a computer science PhD student. Pattern recognition is literally what I do. So I started treating this like a research problem, gathering data, looking for patterns, trying to build a profile of the person who'd been invading my home. First, I went through every recording the security app had flagged over the past 4 months. Most were nothing: shadows, light changes, false alarms. But I found 11 that showed actual movement. 11 times someone had been in my apartment when I wasn't there. The earliest was from mid-January, almost 16 weeks ago. I'd moved into that apartment in September, which meant he'd either started coming shortly after I moved in, or he'd been doing it to the previous tenant too. I made a spreadsheet: dates, times, duration of visits. A pattern emerged almost immediately. He only came on weekdays, never weekends, always between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m., the hours when I was most reliably at the lab. He stayed anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 hours. He was tracking my schedule. He knew when I'd be gone. That realization made me physically ill. I had to step away from my laptop and sit with my head between my knees until the nausea passed. When I could think clearly again, I started working on the video quality. The footage was grainy, low resolution, but I had tools, software I used for my research, algorithms designed to enhance and clarify medical images. It wasn't designed for this purpose, but the underlying principles were the same. I spent an entire night processing the clearest video, the one where he'd stayed for 47 minutes, running it through enhancement filters and sharpening routines. By morning, I had a face. He was older than I'd initially thought, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Weathered features, thinning gray hair, deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He had a scar on his left cheek, a pale slash that ran from his cheekbone almost to his jaw. His eyes were light-colored, though I couldn't tell if they were blue or gray from the footage. He looked ordinary, tired, like someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. I printed out the clearest frame and took it to my building superintendent. His name was Ronnie, a heavy-set man in his 60s who'd been running the building for over a decade. I showed him the photo and asked if he recognized the man. Ronnie's face went pale. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "He's been breaking into my apartment. I have him on video." Ronnie was quiet for a long moment. He kept staring at the photo, his jaw working like he was chewing on something he didn't want to swallow. "That's Arthur Brennan," he finally said. "He used to live in your unit." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Used to live there? When? Years ago. 8, maybe 9 years back. He was there for a long time. 15 years, something like that. Then he got evicted. Ronnie shook his head. It was ugly. He'd stopped paying rent, stopped taking care of himself. The apartment was a mess. We had to get a court order to get him out. Do you know where he went? No idea. Heard he was homeless for a while, then maybe got into some kind of assisted living situation. I haven't seen him in years. Ronnie looked at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "You're telling me he's been getting back into the building?" I showed him one of the videos, watched his face as Arthur Brennan walked out of my bedroom, poured a glass of juice, sat on my couch like he still lived there. "Jesus Christ," Ronnie whispered. "The fire escape. That's how he was getting in." Ronnie confirmed that Arthur's old apartment, my apartment, had always had access to the fire escape through the bedroom window. Arthur would have known that, would have known exactly how to climb up from the alley, how to jimmy the old window lock, how to slip inside without anyone noticing. He wasn't breaking into a stranger's apartment. In his mind, he was coming home. That night, I went back to my apartment for the first time since I'd fled. The locksmith had changed the locks, and I'd had a security bar installed on the bedroom window. The police had given me their card, told me to call if anything else happened. I should have felt safe. I didn't. I walked through the rooms slowly, looking at everything with new eyes. My furniture, my books, my bed. Arthur had been in here dozens of times, maybe hundreds if he'd started before the security app was installed. He'd touched my things, sat in my chairs, slept in my bed. I'd been living in a space that someone else still considered theirs, and I'd had no idea. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. A coffee mug in the cabinet that I didn't remember buying. A book on the shelf that wasn't mine. A blanket folded on the couch in a way I never folded blankets. Signs of another person's presence, so subtle I'd written them off as forgetfulness or fatigue. He'd been leaving pieces of himself behind, and I'd been too blind to see them. I was standing in my bedroom, staring at the window with its new security bar, when my phone buzzed. A notification from the security app. Motion detected. I looked at the screen. The camera was showing a live feed of my kitchen, and there, standing at my front door, fumbling with a key that no longer worked, was Arthur Brennan. He'd come back. I stood frozen in my bedroom, watching the live feed on my phone. Arthur was still at the front door, his back to the camera, working his old key in the lock that no longer accepted it. I could see the confusion in his posture, the way he pulled the key out, examined it, tried again. He'd probably been using that key for months, without any trouble. Now suddenly, it didn't work, and he couldn't understand why. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. I was maybe 20 feet away from him, separated by one door, and he had no idea I was home. I could call the police. I could wait in the bedroom until they arrived. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But I didn't do the smart thing. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Arthur was still there, his face scrunched up in frustration as he tried the key one more time. Up close, even through the distorted lens of the peephole, I could see how worn he looked, how tired. His clothes were clean but old, the kind of things you'd find at a thrift store. His shoes were falling apart. Whatever assisted living situation Ronnie had mentioned, it clearly wasn't treating him well. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound made Arthur freeze. Then I opened the door. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. He looked startled, then confused, then something else. Something that almost looked like embarrassment, like a child caught doing something he knew was wrong. "This is my apartment," he said. His voice was raspy, uncertain. "I live here." "No," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "You used to live here, a long time ago, but it's my apartment now." Arthur shook his head slowly. "No, that's not right. I've lived here for years, 15 years. This is my home." I could see it in his eyes, the fog, the confusion. This wasn't an act. He genuinely believed what he was saying. Something was wrong with him, something beyond just being eccentric or homeless. His mind had gotten stuck somewhere in the past, in a time when this apartment was still his. "Arthur," I said, and he flinched at the sound of his name. "Arthur, you were evicted, years ago. Do you remember?" His face crumpled. For a second I saw something clear behind his eyes, a flash of lucidity that was almost worse than the confusion. He remembered. Somewhere deep down, he knew the truth. But then the fog rolled back in, and his expression smoothed out. "I just need to rest," he said. "I've been walking all day. Can I come in and rest for a while?" "No, I'm sorry, but no." He looked past me into the apartment, his apartment in his mind, and I could see the longing in his face, the desperate need to be somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him, almost stepped aside and let him in. Then I remembered waking up in this apartment, sleeping in this bed for months while this man came and went as he pleased, drinking my juice, watching my TV, going through my things. Whatever sympathy I felt curdled into something colder. "You need to leave," I said. "If you come back here again, I'm calling the police." Arthur's expression changed. The confusion faded, replaced by something harder, angrier. "You can't keep me out of my own home," he said. "I have rights. I lived here for 15 years. 15 years. You think you can just take that away from me?" "I didn't take anything from you. You were evicted. This is my apartment now, legally, officially, mine." "No." He shook his head, more emphatic now. No, 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 this is wrong. This is all wrong. You don't belong here. I belong here. This is my home. He took a step forward, and instinct made me step back. That was a mistake. The movement seemed to embolden him. He took another step, crossing the threshold into my apartment. I think you should leave, he said. His voice had gone quiet, reasonable, terrifying. I think you should go find somewhere else to live. This place isn't for you. I held up my phone, showed him the screen. I'm calling 911 right now. The police are going to come and arrest you for trespassing. Is that what you want? Something shifted in his face. The anger flickered, replaced by fear. He looked at the phone like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. Please, he said. And suddenly he was the confused old man again, the lost soul who just wanted to come home. Please don't. I'll go. I'll leave. Just don't call them. Please. He backed out of the doorway, hands raised. I watched him retreat down the hallway toward the stairs, his shoulders hunched, his head down. He looked broken, pathetic, and I felt sick to my stomach because I didn't know if I'd just defended myself against an intruder or bullied a mentally ill old man out of the only place he'd ever felt safe. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against it and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for days. It was over. He was gone. I was safe. But I knew, even then, that it wasn't really over. Arthur Brennan had been coming to this apartment for months, maybe years. This was where his mind lived, even if his body had been evicted long ago. He wasn't going to stop just because I'd confronted him. He wasn't going to give up the only home he remembered. He was going to come back, and next time, I might not be here to stop him. I called the police and filed a report. Then I called Ronnie and told him what happened. Then I sat on my couch, the couch where Arthur had watched my TV, where he'd probably slept on nights when he had nowhere else to go, and tried to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. The rain had started up again outside. I could hear it against the windows, soft and steady, and for a moment it almost sounded like footsteps on the fire escape. I didn't sleep at all that night. Arthur came back 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. The first time, I wasn't home. The security app caught him on the fire escape, trying to open the bedroom window. He pushed against the security bar for almost 10 minutes before giving up. I watched the footage later, saw the frustration in his movements, the way his shoulders slumped when he finally climbed back down. The second time, he made it into the building somehow, maybe followed another tenant through the front door, and stood outside my apartment for half an hour. I was inside, watching him through the peephole, phone in hand, ready to call 911. He never knocked, never tried the door, just stood there, swaying slightly, like he was waiting for something. Eventually, he wandered away. The third time, the police caught him. A neighbor had seen him on the fire escape and called it in. 2 officers found him sitting on the landing outside my bedroom window, staring at the glass like he could will it to open. They took him into custody, and this time, because of my previous reports and the video evidence, he was held for a psychiatric evaluation. That's when I learned the full story. Arthur Brennan was 63 years old. He'd been diagnosed with early onset dementia 5 years ago, shortly after being evicted from my apartment. For a while, he'd lived in a group home, but he kept wandering off, kept trying to find his way back to the only place his deteriorating mind still recognized as home. Eventually, the group home couldn't handle him anymore, and he'd ended up on the streets. For months, maybe years, he'd been making his way back to this building whenever he could, climbing the fire escape, slipping through the window, spending a few hours in the apartment that his brain still insisted was his, then leaving before anyone noticed, going back to whatever shelter or doorway he was sleeping in, until the pull of home became too strong, and he came back again. He wasn't a predator. He wasn't a stalker. He was just a sick old man whose mind was stuck in the past, who kept returning to the only anchor he had left. That didn't make it okay. It didn't erase the violation I felt, the months of unknowing invasion, the nights I'd slept in a bed someone else had been using. But it made it different. more complicated, sadder. The court ordered Arthur into a secure memory care facility upstate. His family, a sister in Ohio who hadn't seen him in years, agreed to help cover the costs. I was told he'd be safe there, that he'd have a room of his own, that they'd make sure he couldn't wander off anymore. I was told it was the best possible outcome. I'm not sure who that outcome was best for. I moved out of the apartment a month later. I couldn't stay there, not after everything. Every time I walked through the door, I thought about Arthur. Every time I sat on the couch, I imagined him sitting there before me. Every time I closed my eyes in that bedroom, I saw him climbing through the window, settling into my bed, making himself at home in a space that wasn't his anymore. My new place is smaller, more expensive, and on the 6th floor of a building with no fire escape access. The windows have actual locks, not the flimsy latches that had failed me before. I have cameras everywhere now, front door, living room, bedroom, and I check the feeds obsessively, multiple times a day. My therapist says it's a normal response to trauma, that eventually the hypervigilance will fade. I'm not sure I believe her. The thing that haunts me most isn't Arthur himself. It's how long it went on without me knowing. Months of someone else living in my space, touching my things, existing in my home like a ghost I couldn't see. If my laptop hadn't glitched, if that security app hadn't recorded too long, I might still be there. Still oblivious, still sharing my apartment with a stranger every time I left for work. How many people are living like that right now? How many apartments have visitors no one knows about? How many of us are being watched, being used, being invaded, without any idea that we're not alone? I think about Arthur sometimes, sitting in his facility upstate, staring out a window at a landscape he doesn't recognize, his mind still trying to find its way back to a small apartment in a city 300 miles away. I wonder if he's scared. I wonder if he understands what happened, or if he's just confused about why he can't go home. I wonder if he thinks about me, if he even remembers I exist. The last time I checked the security app from my old apartment, I still had access for a few days after I moved out. The place was empty. New tenants hadn't moved in yet. The camera showed an empty kitchen, an empty living room, afternoon light falling across floors that had held so many secrets. Part of me wanted to warn whoever came next, leave them a note, tell them to check their windows, tell them to install cameras and watch the footage carefully. But what would I even say? A mentally ill man used to break in here because he thought it was still his home. That's not a warning. That's a ghost story. And the ghost has been locked away where he can't hurt anyone anymore. At least, that's what I tell myself. I still check my cameras every night before bed. I still listen for sounds that don't belong. I still wake up sometimes at 2 a.m., certain I heard footsteps, certain someone is in the apartment with me. And I lie there in the dark, heart pounding, waiting for a motion alert that never comes. Some nights, I almost wish it would. At least then, I'd know I wasn't crazy. At least then, I'd have proof that the thing I'm afraid of is real. But the apartment stays empty. The cameras show nothing. And I'm left alone with the memory of a stranger drinking my orange juice, watching my television, sleeping in my bed. If you live alone, get a camera, a real one with motion detection that records even when you're not there. Check the footage regularly. Look for the things you don't expect to see, because the scariest thing isn't finding out someone's been in your home. It's all the time that passes before you find out at all. Story 3. The driver who wanted me to get out here. I've taken hundreds of ride shares in my life, probably closer to 1,000 if I'm being honest. When you work in the service industry and don't own a car, it's just part of the routine. Order a ride, check the license plate, get in, get home. I never thought twice about it. I'd scroll through my phone during the trip, barely glancing at the driver, trusting that the app had done its job and delivered me someone safe. That trust feels insane to me now. Like leaving your front door unlocked because nothing bad has ever happened before. I was 24 when this happened, working as a bartender at a cocktail lounge in the downtown area. It was the kind of place that attracted young professionals and date night couples, upscale enough to have a dress code but not so fancy that you felt out of place in nice jeans. The tips were good. The hours were brutal. Most nights, I didn't get off until 1 or 2 a.m., sometimes later if we were slammed and I had to help close. My apartment was about 15 minutes away in a residential neighborhood, close enough to be convenient, far enough that I couldn't walk home alone at 2 in the morning. Not that I would have anyway. The streets between downtown and my place weren't exactly dangerous, but they weren't well lit either, and I'd heard enough stories from other women to know better than to test my luck. So I took ride shares, every single night, without fail. I had the app set up with my home address saved, my payment information stored, one-click ordering that made the whole process automatic. Clock out, order ride, wait by the door, check the plate, get in, go home. I'd done it so many times I could practically do it in my sleep. The night it happened was a Thursday in early November. We'd been busier than usual. Some kind of corporate event had let out nearby, and the bar had filled up with people in suits looking to unwind. I'd been on my feet for 8 hours straight. My back ached, and all I wanted was to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. I ordered my ride at 1:47 a.m., watched the app tell me my driver would arrive in 4 minutes, and went outside to wait. It was cold that night, that sharp, late autumn cold that cuts right through your jacket. A light rain had started falling, just enough to make the sidewalk shine under the streetlights. I stood under the awning outside the bar, arms wrapped around myself, watching the little car icon on my phone inch closer to my location. Marcus, the app said. Gray Honda Civic, 4.9 stars. The car that pulled up was gray, and it looked like a Civic, so I didn't think twice. I checked the license plate, matched what the app showed, and opened the back door. Emily? The driver asked. That's me. I slid into the back seat, buckled my seatbelt, and immediately pulled out my phone to scroll through social media. Standard routine. I barely looked at the driver beyond a quick glance. Male, middle-aged, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't try to make conversation, which was fine by me. I wasn't in the mood to chat. The car pulled away from the curb, and I settled in for the 15-minute ride home. Outside the window, downtown slid past in a blur of neon signs and wet pavement. The rain was picking up now, drumming against the roof of the car, and I remember thinking it was kind of soothing, like white noise. I let my eyes drift, half closed, exhausted, trusting the GPS to get me where I needed to go. I don't know how long it was before I noticed something was wrong. 5 minutes, maybe. 10. I was in that half-aware state where you're not really paying attention to anything, just existing, waiting to arrive. But at some point, I looked up from my phone and glanced out the window, and nothing looked familiar. We should have been in my neighborhood by now. Quiet streets, old houses, the corner store where I sometimes grabbed coffee on my way to work. Instead, I was looking at industrial buildings, warehouses, empty lots surrounded by chain-link fences, the kind of area you drive through on your way somewhere else, not a destination in itself. I sat up straighter and looked at the GPS on the driver's phone, mounted on the dashboard. The screen showed a route I didn't recognize, winding through streets I'd never heard of. That wasn't right. My address was saved in the app. The GPS should have taken us straight there. "Excuse me," I said. "I think you missed a turn or something. This isn't the way to my address." The driver didn't respond right away. He just kept driving, eyes fixed on the road ahead, hands steady on the wheel. "Hey," I said, louder this time. "This isn't right. Where are we going?" He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dark, but something about the way he looked at me made my stomach tighten. "GPS is acting up," he said. His voice was flat, calm. "Don't worry, I know a shortcut." A shortcut. Through an industrial district in the opposite direction from my home, at 2 a.m. on a rainy Thursday night. That's when I knew something was very, very wrong. My first instinct was to check my phone. I pulled up the rideshare app, expecting to see our route, expecting some kind of confirmation that we were headed in the right direction. But the app showed the ride as in progress, the little car icon moving along streets that didn't match what I was seeing outside my window. According to the app, we were almost at my apartment. According to reality, we were in the middle of nowhere. I felt the first real spike of fear then, cold and sharp in my chest. Something was wrong with the app, or something was wrong with this ride, or both. "I need you to take me to my address," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one in the app. You can see it on your screen." Like I said, he didn't look at me this time. "GPS is messed up. I'm taking a shortcut. We'll be there soon." We weren't going to be there soon. I knew that with a certainty that felt like ice water in my veins. We were going in the opposite direction, deeper into this industrial wasteland, and he wasn't even pretending to follow the road anymore. I looked at the door handle, thought about opening it, jumping out. But we were moving too fast, probably 40 miles an hour, and the rain was coming down harder now, making the road slick and treacherous. Even if I survived the fall, I'd be stranded in an unfamiliar area in the middle of the night with no idea where I was. Think. I had to think. I pulled up my phone's actual GPS, the built-in Maps app, and watched our little blue dot move through streets I didn't recognize. We were heading east, away from downtown, into an area the map showed as mostly gray. Industrial zones, rail yards, the kind of place that would be completely deserted at 2 a.m. No businesses open, no people around, no witnesses. My hands were shaking as I typed out a text to my roommate. Something wrong with my ride. Driver going wrong direction. I sent our location, watching the blue dot pulse on the screen. Then I opened the rideshare app again and hit the emergency button. The one I'd never used before. The one I'd always assumed was just there for show. The app told me it was connecting me to emergency services. A few seconds later, my phone started ringing. "Don't answer that." The driver's voice cut through the car like a blade. I looked up and found him watching me in the rearview mirror, his eyes visible now in the glow of a passing streetlight. They were pale, flat, empty of anything I recognized as human. I said, "Don't answer that." His voice hadn't changed, still calm, still flat, but there was something underneath it now. Something that made every hair on my body stand up. The phone kept ringing. I stared at it, frozen, my thumb hovering over the green button. "If you answer that phone," he said, "I'm going to pull over right now, and you don't want me to pull over. Trust me." The ringing stopped. A moment later, a text appeared. 911 operator attempted to reach you. If you're in danger, please call back or text your location. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The car kept driving, deeper into the darkness, and I could feel him watching me in the mirror, waiting to see what I would do. "Put the phone down," he said, "on the seat next to you, where I can see it." I didn't want to. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to hold on to it, to keep my only connection to the outside world clutched in my hand. But there was something in his voice, a certainty, a control, that told me he wasn't bluffing. If I didn't do what he said, something worse was going to happen. I put the phone on the seat. The screen was still lit, still showing that pulsing blue dot, and I prayed my roommate was watching, prayed she'd called the police, prayed someone was coming. "Good girl." The words made my skin crawl. I pressed myself against the door, as far from him as I could get, and tried to control my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't panic. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to stay calm, stay alert, wait for an opportunity. The car slowed. I looked out the window and saw we were approaching a chain-link fence, a gate hanging open. Beyond it, a parking lot full of shadows and rusting equipment. An abandoned warehouse of some kind. The perfect place to take someone you didn't want found. "We're here," the driver said. He pulled through the gate and stopped the car in the middle of the empty lot, rain hammering against the windshield, darkness pressing in from all sides. He turned around in his seat to look at me. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. Ordinary, forgettable. The kind of face you'd never pick out of a lineup because there was nothing distinctive about it, nothing that would warn you to stay away. "Get out," he said. I didn't move. I said, "Get out." He reached toward the center console, and I saw something glint in the dim light. Metal. A blade. "Don't make me ask again." My hand found the door handle. I pulled it. Nothing happened. The child locks. He'd engaged the child locks. He smiled. It was the first expression I'd seen on his face, and it was worse than the emptiness. So much worse. "I'll let you out," he said, "when I'm ready." Time does strange things when you're terrified. It stretches and compresses, moments lasting forever and disappearing in the same breath. I don't know how long I sat there in the back of that car, watching him watch me, the rain hammering against the windows like it was trying to break through. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. It felt like hours. He was still holding the knife, turning it slowly in his hand, letting the dim light catch the blade. He wasn't in a hurry. That was the thing that scared me most. He had all the time in the world, and he knew it. We were in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, and no one was coming. Except someone was coming. I'd sent my location. I'd hit the emergency button. My roommate knew something was wrong. I just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. "You're probably wondering why," he said. His voice was conversational now, almost friendly, like we were having a chat over coffee. "They always wonder why, like there has to be a reason." I didn't say anything. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth I'd scream, and I didn't know what he'd do if I screamed. "There isn't a reason," he continued. "Not really. I just like it. The way you looked when you realized we weren't going to your apartment. The way you look right now." He tilted his head, studying me like I was something interesting he'd found under a rock. "Fear is beautiful. Did you know that? Most people never get to see it up close. Real fear, I mean, not the fake stuff in movies." He reached for the door handle on his side, and I felt my whole body tense. This was it. He was going to come around and open my door and drag me out into that empty parking lot, and whatever happened next would happen in the dark where no one would ever know. But he paused, cocked his head like he was listening to something. Sirens, distant but getting closer, the wail of them cutting through the rain, through the silence, through the nightmare I'd fallen into. His expression changed. The calm cracked, just for a second, and I saw something underneath. Annoyance, maybe. Frustration. Like a child whose game had been interrupted. "Looks like someone's coming," he said. "That's inconvenient." He turned back to the steering wheel, put the car in drive. I felt a surge of desperate hope. Maybe he was going to run. Maybe he'd drop me off somewhere. Maybe this was my chance. But he didn't head for the gate. He drove deeper into the lot, around the side of the warehouse, into shadows so thick I couldn't see anything beyond the reach of the headlights. The sirens were louder now, close, but they wouldn't know to look back here. They'd check the main lot, maybe drive around the perimeter, but this place was a maze of abandoned buildings and overgrown lots. We could be 50 feet from help and completely invisible. He stopped the car again and killed the engine. Killed the headlights. We sat in absolute darkness, the only sound the rain and the approaching sirens and my own ragged breathing. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. I couldn't see him anymore, just the shape of him in the driver's seat, a shadow among shadows. "We're going to wait. If they find us, I'll tell them you had a panic attack, that you're confused, that you accused me of something I didn't do. It'll be your word against mine, and I have a 4.9 rating and 300 rides without a complaint." I thought of the phone on the seat next to me. The screen had gone dark, but it was still there, still connected. "If they don't find us," he continued, "we'll wait until they leave, and then we'll continue our conversation." The sirens were right on top of us now. I could see flashes of red and blue reflecting off the wet pavement through the warehouse windows. They were in the main lot, searching. So close, so impossibly close. I had one chance, one moment where his attention was on the police outside and not on me. I grabbed my phone from the seat, fumbled for the screen, and screamed. As loud as I could, as long as I could, pouring every ounce of terror and desperation into that sound. I screamed, and I didn't stop, even when he lunged for me, even when I felt his hand close around my arm, even when the knife came up and I felt it graze my shoulder. I kept screaming, and then light exploded through the windows, a flashlight, then another, voices shouting, someone pounding on the glass. The driver let go of me, recoiled, and suddenly the door beside me was wrenched open from the outside and hands were pulling me out into the rain. I collapsed on the wet pavement, sobbing, shaking so hard I couldn't stand. Someone was putting a blanket around my shoulders. Someone else was shouting commands at the driver, ordering him out of the car, ordering him to get on the ground. I heard the words, but they didn't register. Nothing registered except the rain on my face and the solid ground beneath me, and the realization that I was alive. I was alive. They found the knife under the driver's seat. They found zip ties in the glove compartment. They found a roll of duct tape in the trunk, along with a plastic tarp and a shovel. A shovel. I try not to think about what the shovel was for. I try not to imagine what would have happened if my roommate hadn't called 911, if the police hadn't traced my location, if they'd arrived 5 minutes later, or searched the wrong building first. I try not to think about any of it, but some nights, when the rain is falling and I'm alone in the dark, I can't think about anything else. His name wasn't Marcus. It wasn't even close. The police told me later, after I'd been taken to the hospital, after the shallow cut on my shoulder had been cleaned and bandaged, after I'd given my statement 3 different times to 3 different people. The man who'd picked me up that night was named Dale Whitford. He was 47 years old. He'd never driven for any rideshare company in his life. He'd stolen the identity. Somehow, the police were still figuring out exactly how. He'd gotten access to a real driver's account. Cloned the profile, copied the car information, learned the system well enough to intercept ride requests in certain areas at certain times. He'd been doing it for almost a year. Cruising downtown late at night, waiting for young women to request rides, showing up before the real driver could. Most of the time, nothing happened. He'd pick them up, drive them home, let them out at their addresses like a normal ride, building his rating, establishing trust, waiting. But sometimes, the police said, he'd pick someone and decide they were special. Someone alone, someone vulnerable, someone who wouldn't be missed right away. And those rides didn't end at home. I wasn't his first. They found evidence of at least 4 other women when they searched his apartment. Driver's licenses, jewelry, photographs, trophies. Just like in the stories you hear about serial killers, the ones you tell yourself couldn't possibly be real. The women they belonged to had been reported missing over the past 18 months. Some had been found, or parts of them had been found, in remote areas outside the city. Others were still missing. I sat in the detective's office and looked at photographs of their faces. Young women, all of them. Around my age, give or take a few years. They looked like people I might know, people I might have worked with, or passed on the street, or sat next to at a bar without ever knowing their names. "You're lucky," the detective said. She wasn't being cruel. I could see in her eyes that she meant it. "If your roommate hadn't called when she did, if we hadn't gotten to you in time." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Dale Whitford didn't confess. Even with the evidence, even with the trophies in his apartment and the tools in his trunk, he maintained this eerie silence throughout the interrogation. The detectives showed me clips of it later. I don't know why. Maybe they thought it would help me process what happened. He just sat there in the interview room, calm and still, that same empty expression on his face, like he was waiting for them to finish so he could get back to whatever he'd been doing. The only time he reacted was when they mentioned my name. A small smile, barely visible. The same smile I'd seen in the car when he realized I couldn't open the door. Like he was remembering something pleasant. I had nightmares about that smile for months. The trial was 8 months later. I had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom 20 feet away from him and describe what happened that night while he watched me with those flat, empty eyes. His defense attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Dale had simply made a wrong turn, that I'd panicked and overreacted, that the items in his apartment and his car were circumstantial. The jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too overwhelming. The other victims, the ones who couldn't testify because they were dead or still missing, their stories were told through photographs and forensic reports and the grief of their families sitting in the gallery. Guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder, guilty on 1 count of attempted murder, guilty on multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and criminal impersonation. The judge gave him 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. I cried when they read the verdict, not from relief exactly, though there was some of that. More from exhaustion, from the weight of finally being able to let go of something I'd been carrying for almost a year, from knowing that he would never sit in a car outside a bar at 2 a.m. and wait for another girl who just wanted to go home. But even now, even knowing he's locked away forever, I don't feel safe. Not really. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about surviving something like that. It doesn't end when the danger ends. The fear doesn't go away just because the person who caused it is behind bars. It lives in your body, in your nervous system, in the part of your brain that's always scanning for threats, even when there aren't any. I flinch when cars slow down next to me on the street. I can't get into a vehicle with a stranger without my heart racing. I check and double-check license plates, driver photos, faces, and even then, even when everything matches, there's a voice in my head asking, what if it's wrong? What if this time the system fails again? That voice never stops. I'm not sure it ever will. It's been 2 years since that night. 2 years since I climbed into a stranger's car and almost didn't climb out again. Some days it feels like a lifetime ago. Other days it feels like it happened yesterday, like I could close my eyes and be right back in that parking lot, rain hammering against the windows, his voice telling me that fear is beautiful. I don't work at the bar anymore. I couldn't. Not with the hours. Not with the late nights. Not with the constant need to get home in the dark. I found a desk job at an insurance company, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's boring and it pays less, and sometimes I miss the energy of the bar, the music and the laughter and the feeling of being good at something. But I'm home before sunset every single day, and that's worth more to me now than any tip ever was. I bought a car 6 months after the trial. A used Honda, nothing special, but it's mine. I learned to drive at 25 years old, white-knuckling the steering wheel through every lesson, forcing myself to get behind the wheel even when every instinct screamed at me to stay home where it was safe. It took me 3 tries to pass the test because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. But I did it. I have my license now, and I drive myself everywhere. And I will never get into a stranger's car again as long as I live. My therapist says I've made remarkable progress. She says that what I went through would have broken most people, and the fact that I'm still functioning, still working, still seeing friends, still building a life, is something to be proud of. I want to believe her. Most days I do, but there are still nights when I wake up gasping, still moments when a certain song on the radio or the smell of rain on pavement sends me spiraling back to that night. Still times when I look at my reflection and see the girl in the back seat who thought she was going to die. I think about the other women sometimes, the ones who weren't as lucky as me. I've learned their names, looked at their photographs, read everything I could find about who they were before Dale Whitford took them. Melissa Hernandez, 22, nursing student. Brittany Cole, 26, graphic designer. Jasmine Wright, 23, waitress at a diner across town. Rachel Kim, 28, paralegal. 4 women who did exactly what I did. Ordered a ride, checked the plate, got into a car that looked right, trusted the system to keep them safe. I go to the memorial they built in the park downtown. It's not much, just a small garden with a plaque listing their names. But I bring flowers sometimes. I sit on the bench nearby and I talk to them, even though I know they can't hear me. I tell them I'm sorry. I tell them I wish I could have done something. I tell them I'm trying to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. That's part of why I'm telling this story. Because what happened to me, what happened to Melissa and Brittany and Jasmine and Rachel, it shouldn't be possible. The system should have protected us. The app should have verified that the driver picking us up was actually the driver we requested. There should have been safeguards, checks, something to prevent a predator from slipping through the cracks and hunting women like prey. But there weren't. And until there are, we have to protect ourselves. So here's what I need you to hear. If you ever take a ride share, and I know most of you will because it's convenient and it's normal and it feels safe, please, please be careful. Check the license plate. Check the driver's photo. Ask them to confirm your name instead of saying it yourself. Share your trip with someone you trust and make sure they're actually watching it. If anything feels wrong, if the driver seems off, if the route doesn't look right, if that little voice in your gut starts whispering that something's not okay, trust it. Get out. Make a scene. Call for help. Don't worry about being polite. Don't worry about seeming paranoid. Don't worry about making the driver uncomfortable. Your safety is more important than their feelings. Your life is more important than avoiding an awkward moment. I was lucky. I had a roommate who noticed something was wrong. I had police who responded fast enough to find me. I had a scream loud enough to be heard through the rain and the darkness and the walls of an abandoned warehouse. Not everyone gets that lucky. Not everyone gets a second chance. Dale Whitford is in prison now, and he's going to die there. But there are other people like him out there. People who see vulnerability as an opportunity. People who use our trust against us. People who look ordinary and act normal right up until the moment they don't. I can't make you safe. I can't protect you from every threat, every predator, every wrong turn on a dark night. But I can tell you what happened to me. I can make sure you know that the danger is real, that it doesn't just happen in movies or to other people, that one wrong ride can change everything. Be careful out there. Watch your surroundings. Trust your instincts. And if a driver ever takes you somewhere you didn't ask to go, if they ever tell you to get out here instead of at your destination, if anything about the situation feels even slightly wrong, fight. Scream. Do whatever it takes to survive. Because the alternative isn't something I can describe. I almost lived it, and I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that I didn't. Story 4. The night nurse who locked me in. There's a particular kind of helplessness that comes with being a patient in a hospital. You're in a bed you can't leave, wearing a gown that doesn't close properly, attached to machines that beep and whir and remind you constantly that your body has failed you in some fundamental way. You're at the mercy of strangers, people you've never met, whose qualifications you're trusting on faith, who have access to your body in ways that would be unthinkable in any other context. We don't think about it when we're healthy. When we're not, it's all we can think about. I was 31 when I ended up at Riverside Memorial. A car accident. Some teenager ran a red light while texting, and I was the unlucky one in the intersection when it happened. I don't remember the impact itself, just the screech of brakes and then waking up in the ER with doctors shouting numbers at each other and pain like nothing I'd ever experienced radiating from my left side. Broken ribs, ruptured spleen, internal bleeding. They took me into surgery that night, and when I woke up, I was told I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I'd been hit by a car, which I had been, and then cut open and stitched back together like a torn piece of fabric. Every breath hurt. Moving was agony. The morphine they gave me helped, but it also made everything fuzzy and distant, like I was experiencing the world through a thick pane of glass. Riverside Memorial wasn't a big hospital. It was a regional facility serving a handful of small towns in the area. The kind of place where everyone on staff seemed to know each other, and the cafeteria food was slightly better than you'd expect. I'd been transferred there from the trauma center in the city once I was stable enough to move. It was closer to my parents' house, and they wanted to be able to visit without driving 2 hours each way. I didn't have a say in the matter. I was barely conscious when they made the decision. My room was on the 3rd floor, in a wing that felt perpetually quiet. Most of the other patients were elderly, hip replacements, heart problems, the kinds of things that came with age. I was the youngest person on the floor by at least 30 years, and the nurses kept commenting on it, telling me how strong I was, how well I was healing, how I'd be back on my feet in no time. I smiled and nodded and counted the hours until I could go home. The day shift was fine, busy, efficient, a rotating cast of nurses and aides who checked my vitals and changed my dressings and helped me to the bathroom when I needed it. I learned their names, made small talk, tried to be a good patient even when the pain made me want to scream. During the day, I felt safe, watched over, cared for. The night shift was different. There were fewer staff at night. Budget cuts, one of the day nurses told me apologetically. Just a skeleton crew to handle emergencies and make rounds every few hours. The hallways got darker, the sounds got quieter, and the hospital took on a different character entirely. That antiseptic smell seemed stronger at night, and the beeping of machines down the hall echoed in ways it never did during the day. I met her on my third night at Riverside. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep, the morphine making my dreams strange and vivid, when I heard the door to my room open. The light from the hallway made me squint, and for a moment I couldn't see who was there, just a silhouette in scrubs, moving toward my bed. "Time to check your vitals," she said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, like she was afraid of waking someone. "I'm Denise. I'll be taking care of you tonight." She stepped into the dim glow of the machines by my bed, and I got my first look at her. She was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, and a face that might have been kind if she'd smiled. She wasn't smiling. Her expression was neutral, professional, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. Something too focused, too intent, like she was studying me rather than just checking on me. "How's your pain level?" she asked, wrapping the blood pressure cuff around my arm. "About a 6, I said, "maybe a 7. She nodded, made a note on her tablet, and adjusted something on my IV line. I felt a cool rush through my arm, and within seconds, the pain began to recede, replaced by that familiar floating sensation that meant the drugs were kicking in. "There," she said, "that should help you sleep." She stood there for a moment longer, watching me, not checking the machines, not writing notes, just watching, her eyes fixed on my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle even through the haze of medication. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Of course." She reached out and adjusted my blanket, her fingers brushing against my arm. The touch lingered a second too long. "You just rest now. I'll take good care of you." She left, closing the door behind her. I lay there in the darkness, heart beating faster than it should have been, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. She was just a nurse doing her job. The intensity I'd seen in her eyes was probably just focus, just professionalism. The lingering touch was probably just kindness. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Something whispered that there was a reason I felt afraid. I told myself I was being paranoid. The drugs were making me confused, making me see threats where there weren't any. I closed my eyes and let the morphine pull me under, and I didn't wake up until morning. When I did, I noticed something strange. The call button that was supposed to be clipped to my bed rail, the one I used to summon nurses when I needed help, was gone. And my room door, which had always stayed slightly ajar to let in light from the hallway, was closed. Completely, firmly closed. Like someone had wanted to make sure I couldn't call for help, like someone had wanted to make sure no one could hear me. I spent those 3 hours preparing. It wasn't much. I was bedridden, broken, attached to machines I didn't understand. But I did what I could. I found my phone in the drawer of my bedside table and made sure it was charged. I programmed 911 into the speed dial. I texted my mother and told her I loved her, not explaining why, not wanting to worry her with something she couldn't help with. Then I did something that hurt more than anything had since the accident. I reached over to my IV stand and found the place where the tube connected to the port in my arm. I'd watched the nurses do it enough times to understand the mechanism, a simple twist lock that held the line in place. With shaking fingers, I disconnected it. The effect was almost immediate. Without the steady drip of painkillers, the agony in my ribs came roaring back, so intense I had to bite down on my pillow to keep from screaming. But I needed to be alert. I needed to be awake. Whatever Denise had planned for me, I couldn't fight it if I was drugged into oblivion. I tucked the disconnected line under my blanket where it wouldn't be immediately visible. Then I waited. The shift change happened at 7. I heard voices in the hallway, the bustle of day staff leaving and night staff arriving. I watched the strip of light under my door, looking for shadows, listening for footsteps. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it might set off one of the monitors. She came at 9:30. The door opened slowly and Denise stepped inside. She was carrying a small tray with supplies on it, syringes, vials, things I couldn't identify in the dim light. She set it on the table beside my bed and looked down at me with that same empty smile. "How are we feeling tonight?" "Fine," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Actually, I'm feeling a lot better. I think the medication is really working." "Is it?" She picked up one of the syringes and held it up to the light, checking the dosage. "That's wonderful. But the doctor ordered something extra for tonight, to help you sleep." I watched her hands as she reached for my IV line, watched her fingers find the connection point, pause, then search again when she realized something was wrong. "The line's disconnected," she said. Her voice didn't change, but something in her posture did, a subtle stiffening, a new alertness. "That's not supposed to happen." "It must have come loose," I said. I was shifting around, trying to get comfortable. She looked at me, really looked at me, those intense eyes boring into mine, and I knew she didn't believe me. I knew she understood exactly what I'd done and why. "Let me fix that for you," she said. She reached for my arm and I pulled away. The movement sent a spike of agony through my ribs, but I didn't care. I couldn't let her reconnect that line. I couldn't let her put whatever was in that syringe into my body. "Don't touch me." The mask slipped, just for a second, just a flicker, but I saw what was underneath. Irritation, maybe, or hunger. Something that had nothing to do with nursing or caregiving or any of the things she was supposed to be. "You're being difficult," she said softly. "I don't like difficult patients." "I know about Margaret." The words came out before I could stop them. Denise went very still. "Margaret Holloway," I continued. "Room 312. She died 3 days ago. Heart failure, they said. But that's not what really happened, is it?" Silence. The monitors beeped steadily, measuring a heart rate that was climbing higher with every second. Denise stared at me, and I stared back, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and transformed her face into something terrible. "Margaret was old," she said. "She was suffering. I helped her. That's what nurses do. We help people." "You killed her." I eased her passing. "There's a difference." She picked up the syringe again, turned it over in her fingers. "Some patients, they linger for so long. In pain, in fear, trapped in bodies that have already given up. It's cruel to make them wait. Don't you think?" I fumbled for my phone under the blanket. My fingers found it, pressed the button I'd programmed, held it down. "What are you doing?" Denise's voice sharpened. She moved toward me, faster than I expected, and grabbed my wrist. "Give me that." "I already called 911, I said. "They're listening right now. They heard everything you just said." Her grip tightened until I thought my bones might snap. She stared at the phone in my hand, at the screen showing an active call, at the seconds ticking by as the dispatcher listened to everything. "You're lying." "Check for yourself." She grabbed the phone, looked at the screen. I saw the moment she realized I was telling the truth, the way her face went slack, the way her eyes widened just slightly. "Hello?" A tinny voice came through the speaker. "Ma'am, can you tell me your location? We're dispatching units to your GPS coordinates now." Denise dropped the phone like it had burned her. She looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. The calculation in her eyes was horrible to watch. She was weighing her options, trying to decide if she had time to finish what she'd started. "They're coming," I said. "You can't kill me and get away before they arrive. It's over." For one terrible heartbeat, I thought she was going to do it anyway. I saw her hand tighten on the syringe, saw her lean toward me, saw something in her face that was beyond reason or self-preservation. Then she turned and walked out of the room, not running, walking calm and controlled, like she was just ending a normal shift. I heard her footsteps disappear down the hallway, heard a door slam somewhere in the distance, and then silence. I lay there in the dark, phone clutched against my chest, tears streaming down my face, waiting for the sirens that would tell me I was safe. They caught her in the parking lot. She'd almost made it to her car, another 30 seconds, and she would have been gone, disappeared into the night like she'd probably done before. But the police were faster than she expected, or maybe she wasn't thinking clearly by then. They found her sitting in the driver's seat with the engine running, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead like she was waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. She didn't resist, didn't say a word, according to the officers who arrested her. Just held out her wrists for the handcuffs and let them put her in the back of the cruiser with that same empty expression she'd worn every time she walked into my room, like none of it mattered, like she'd already moved past it in her mind. The investigation took months. They exhumed Margaret Holloway's body and found exactly what Patricia had suspected: lethal levels of potassium chloride, enough to stop a healthy heart in minutes. Then they started looking at other patients Denise had cared for over the years, other unexpected deaths that had been attributed to natural causes. The final count was 11. 11 people who checked into Riverside Memorial expecting to get better and never checked out. 11 people who'd trusted a nurse to take care of them. The trial was national news for a while. Angel of Death, the headlines called her, that awful term they use for healthcare workers who kill their patients. Denise's defense attorney tried to argue that she was mentally ill, that she genuinely believed she was helping people by ending their suffering. The prosecution painted a different picture: a woman who enjoyed the power she had over vulnerable patients, who got something out of watching them die, who had been doing it for almost 2 decades without anyone noticing. I testified at the trial, sat in that witness box and described the call button disappearing, the hallway lights going dark, the way she'd stood in my doorway watching me sleep. I described disconnecting my own IV line, the agony of those hours without painkillers, the terror of facing her alone in my room while she explained that she was just trying to help. Denise watched me the entire time, that same intense stare, those same flat eyes. She didn't react when I described what she'd done, didn't flinch when the jury looked at her with horror and disgust. She just watched, like she was still studying me, still trying to figure out how I'd slipped away. Guilty on 11 counts of first-degree murder, guilty on 1 count of attempted murder. That one was mine. The judge gave her life without parole, and when they led her out of the courtroom, she finally looked away from me. I never saw her face again. I spent another 3 weeks in the hospital after that night. Not at Riverside. They transferred me to a facility in the city, somewhere with better oversight and staff I'd never met before. I couldn't sleep without the lights on. I couldn't let a nurse touch my IV without watching every movement they made. I flinched every time someone opened my door, my heart racing until I confirmed it wasn't her. It's been 4 years now. The physical scars have healed. My ribs knit back together, my spleen recovered. My body eventually forgave me for everything I put it through. But the other scars, the ones you can't see, those are still there. I still have nightmares about that hospital room. I still wake up sometimes convinced I can smell antiseptic, convinced I can hear footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. I don't trust hospitals anymore. I know that's irrational. What happened to me was rare, a 1 in a million nightmare that most patients will never experience. But I can't help it. Every time I have to see a doctor, every time I have to get blood drawn or stay overnight for observation, I feel that old terror creeping back. The vulnerability, the helplessness, the knowledge that I'm putting my life in the hands of strangers and hoping they mean me well. Patricia testified at the trial too. She'd tried to warn the charge nurse, tried to get me moved to a different room, tried to do something when she sensed that Denise was dangerous. The system failed her, just like it failed me. Too much bureaucracy, too much deference to seniority, too much reluctance to believe that a colleague could be capable of murder. She doesn't work at Riverside anymore. None of the nurses who were there that night do. The hospital settled a massive lawsuit with the victims' families and implemented new protocols for monitoring patient deaths. Too little, too late for the 11 people who died, but maybe enough to prevent it from happening again. I think about them sometimes, the other victims. I never met any of them, but I've memorized their names, their faces, the little details from the news coverage that made them real. A grandmother who loved gardening, a retired teacher who'd been looking forward to his granddaughter's wedding, an Army veteran who survived 3 tours overseas only to die in a hospital bed 40 miles from home. They trusted the system. They trusted the woman who came into their rooms at night, who spoke softly and adjusted their blankets and told them she'd take good care of them. They had no reason to believe she was anything other than what she appeared to be. I almost trusted her too. Almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, that the drugs were making me see threats where there weren't any. Almost let her put that syringe in my arm because I didn't want to seem difficult. If I'd done that, I would have been victim number 12. So here's what I need you to understand. If you're ever in a hospital, if you're ever at the mercy of people you don't know, and something feels wrong, trust yourself. Don't let anyone tell you you're overreacting. Don't let politeness or deference or the fear of seeming crazy override your instincts. Your gut knows things your brain doesn't. It picks up on patterns and signals that never reach your conscious mind. When it tells you someone is dangerous, when it screams at you to get away, listen. I listened. I fought back. And I'm still here to tell this story. Denise is in prison now, and she's never getting out. But there are other people like her, in hospitals, in nursing homes, in any place where the vulnerable are cared for by strangers. Not many, but enough. Enough that you should never stop paying attention. Be your own advocate. Ask questions. Make noise. And if someone tells you you're being difficult, wear that label like armor. Being difficult kept me alive. Story 5. The breath on my neck as I slept. You know that feeling when you're right on the edge of sleep, drifting somewhere between consciousness and dreams, and something pulls you back? A sound, a shift in the air, some signal your brain picks up even when the rest of you has checked out for the night. That's what happened to me. That's how I first knew something was wrong. I felt breath on my neck, warm, slow, rhythmic. The unmistakable sensation of someone exhaling inches from my skin. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, and whoever was behind me was close enough that I could feel the heat of them, could almost sense the shape of their body in the darkness behind mine. I didn't move. Some primitive part of my brain, the part that remembers being prey, that knows what it means to be hunted, took over and held me absolutely still. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, every muscle in my body screaming to run, while some deeper instinct insisted that stillness was my only chance of survival. The breathing continued, in and out, slow and even, like whoever was there had all the time in the world. I don't know how long I lay there. Minutes, probably, though it felt like hours. Eventually, the warmth behind me receded, and I heard something. Soft footsteps, barely audible, moving away from my bed. A faint creak that might have been a door. Then nothing. I didn't open my eyes until the sun came up. My apartment looked exactly the same as it had the night before. Small bedroom, clothes on the floor, phone charging on the nightstand. The window was closed, the door was shut. Everything was where it was supposed to be. In the gray morning light, with traffic noise drifting up from the street below, it was easy to convince myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. Sleep paralysis, maybe. I'd heard of that. The way your brain can conjure sensations that feel absolutely real when you're caught between sleeping and waking. It happened to people all the time. It didn't mean anything. I got up, showered, went to work. Didn't mention it to anyone. What was I going to say? I thought someone was breathing on me in my sleep. They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. I should give you some context. I was 26 at the time, living alone in a ground-floor apartment in a mid-sized city. I'd moved there about 8 months earlier for a job in software development. Decent salary, long hours, the kind of work that leaves you too drained to do much of anything when you get home except eat dinner and collapse into bed. I didn't know many people in the city. My social life was basically non-existent. Most nights I was asleep by 10 and up at 6, grinding through the week until the weekend came and I could sleep in and pretend I had a life. The apartment was nothing special. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was really just a corner of the living room with a stove and a refrigerator. The building was old, one of those brick structures from the 1950s that had been converted into cheap rentals for young professionals who couldn't afford anything better. My unit was on the ground floor, which I thought was convenient when I signed the lease. No stairs to climb after a long day, easy access to the laundry room in the basement. It never occurred to me that ground floor also meant easier access for anyone who wanted to get in. The window in my bedroom faced a narrow alley between my building and the one next door. Not much of a view, just brick walls and a dumpster and the occasional cat picking through garbage. I kept the blinds closed most of the time because there was nothing worth looking at, and because the idea of someone being able to see into my bedroom made me vaguely uncomfortable. The window had a lock on it, one of those cheap latches that you twist to secure, and I always made sure it was fastened before I went to sleep. Always. The night after I felt the breath, I checked the window 3 times before getting into bed. Checked the front door too, tugged on the handle to make sure the deadbolt had caught. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there was nothing to be afraid of, that my brain had just played a trick on me in the darkness. I fell asleep with the lights on anyway. Nothing happened that night, or the next night, or the one after that. A week passed, then 2, and the memory of that warm breath on my neck started to fade. I stopped checking the window obsessively. I started sleeping with the lights off again. I almost forgot it had ever happened. Then I found the handprint on my window. It was a Saturday morning, one of those rare days when I didn't have to rush off to work. I'd slept in, made coffee, was standing in my bedroom drinking it while I scrolled through my phone. The sun was hitting the glass at an angle that caught something I'd never noticed before, a smudge on the inside of the window. Not the outside, where you'd expect dirt and grime to accumulate. The inside. I walked closer, squinting at it. It wasn't just a smudge. It was a handprint. Clear as day, 4 fingers and a palm pressed against the glass. Too big to be mine. Too fresh to have been there when I moved in. Someone had touched my window from inside my apartment. Someone had stood right there, inches from where I slept, and put their hand on the glass. I thought about the breath on my neck. I thought about how certain I'd been that someone was behind me in the darkness. I thought about all the nights since then, all the hours I'd spent unconscious and vulnerable in this room, and I realized, with a cold certainty that made my coffee turn to acid in my stomach, that it hadn't been a dream. Someone had been in my apartment that night, which meant they might have been here other nights too, which meant they could come back. I called the police that morning, sat on hold for 20 minutes, then explained to a bored-sounding dispatcher that someone had been in my apartment. She asked if anything was missing. I said no. She asked if there were signs of forced entry. I said I didn't know, I hadn't checked. She said they'd send someone to take a report. 2 officers showed up about an hour later, a man and a woman who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I showed them the handprint on the window, explained about the breath on my neck, watched their expressions shift from neutral to skeptical. The male officer examined the window latch and said it looked fine to him. The female officer asked if I'd had anyone over recently who might have touched the glass. When I said no, she exchanged a look with her partner that made my face burn. They took a report, said they'd have extra patrols in the area, suggested I might want to get better locks, maybe a security camera. Then they left, and I was alone again in an apartment that no longer felt like mine. I spent the rest of that day searching, every inch of the apartment, every corner and closet and space behind furniture. I didn't know what I was looking for, some sign of entry, some evidence that I wasn't crazy. The window in the bedroom seemed secure. The front door had a deadbolt I always locked. There was no other way in that I could see. But then I checked the window in the bathroom. It was small, the kind of frosted glass that lets in light without letting people see through. I'd never paid much attention to it because it seemed too narrow for anyone to fit through. But when I examined the latch, I found it wasn't quite seated properly. The lock was in the closed position, but the window itself could still be pushed open from the outside. The latch wasn't actually catching on anything. It had probably been like that since I moved in, and I'd never noticed because I'd never checked. I felt sick. 8 months. I'd been living here for 8 months with a window that didn't lock properly in a ground floor apartment that anyone could access from the alley behind the building. 8 months of sleeping 10 feet away from an entrance I didn't know existed. I fixed the latch that afternoon, went to the hardware store, bought a proper lock, installed it myself. Then I bought a security camera, a cheap wireless one that I could monitor from my phone, and set it up in my bedroom, pointing at the window and the door. If anyone came in again, I'd have proof. I'd have something more than a handprint and a feeling. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed watching the camera feed on my phone, staring at the grainy image of my own room, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. The apartment stayed quiet, the shadows stayed still, and eventually exhaustion dragged me under despite my best efforts to stay awake. The next few nights were the same. I'd watch the feed until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore, then sleep fitfully until morning. The camera never caught anything. No movement, no intruders, no evidence that anyone had been there except me. Part of me started to wonder if maybe the police were right, if maybe the handprint had been there all along and I just hadn't noticed, if maybe the breath on my neck really had been sleep paralysis and I was spinning out over nothing. Then I found the other signs. It started with small things. A glass in the kitchen sink that I didn't remember using. A towel in the bathroom that was damp when I knew I hadn't showered that day. The feeling that objects had shifted slightly, moved just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to be sure. I started taking pictures of my apartment before I left for work, comparing them to what I found when I came home, looking for differences. Most days, there was nothing, but some days, something would be wrong. A drawer not quite closed all the way. A pillow on my bed at a different angle. A water glass that had less water in it than I remembered. Someone was coming into my apartment while I was at work. I was sure of it now. Using my things, touching my stuff, existing in my space like they had every right to be there. The camera hadn't caught anything because it was pointed at the bedroom, and whoever this was knew to avoid that room. Or maybe they only came during the day, when the camera was off because I was trying to save battery. I started leaving the camera running 24/7, upgraded to a model with more storage, positioned it to capture more of the apartment. For 3 days, nothing happened. I reviewed hours of footage, watching my empty living room and kitchen at fast-forward speed, looking for any sign of movement. On the 4th day, I found it. The timestamp said 2:47 p.m. I'd been at work, sitting in a meeting I didn't care about, while someone opened my bathroom window and climbed inside. The camera only caught the edge of it, a shadow moving past the kitchen, a brief glimpse of a figure disappearing into the bathroom. They were there for almost an hour. I watched the footage 3 times, trying to catch a clear shot of their face, but they were careful. They knew where the camera was. They avoided it deliberately. At 3:42 p.m., they left the same way they'd come in. And I realized, with dawning horror, that they'd probably done this dozens of times before, maybe more. Coming into my apartment in the middle of the day, spending hours there while I was at work, doing God knows what. I called the police again, showed them the footage. This time, they took me seriously. "Do you have any idea who this might be?" the officer asked, watching the shadow move across my screen. I shook my head. I didn't know anyone in this city. I had no enemies, no exes, no one who would have any reason to target me. But someone had. Someone had found my apartment, found the broken latch, found a way into my life, and I had no idea why. The police increased their patrols like they'd promised. I saw cruisers driving down my street more often, officers occasionally walking the alley behind the building. It should have made me feel safer. It didn't. I took time off work. Told my boss I had a family emergency. Couldn't explain the details. I couldn't focus on code when someone was breaking into my home, and I couldn't leave my apartment empty knowing they might come back. So I stayed. Set up multiple cameras covering every angle. Sat in my living room with the blinds closed and watched the feeds on my laptop, waiting. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. No movement, no shadows, no one climbing through the bathroom window. I started to wonder if the police presence had scared them off, if maybe the worst was over. On the 4th day, I ran out of food. I'd been ordering delivery, leaving cash outside the door so I wouldn't have to open it, but even that felt like too much exposure. Eventually, I had to leave. Had to go to the grocery store, had to exist in the world like a normal person. I was gone for 45 minutes. When I came back, I knew immediately that something was wrong. The cameras were still running. I checked them from my phone in the parking lot, scanning through the footage from while I was away. Nothing. No one had entered through the bathroom window. No one had come through the front door. The apartment looked exactly the same as I'd left it, but it didn't feel the same. I walked through each room slowly, cataloging everything. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, bedroom. Everything was in place. Everything was where it should be. I was about to convince myself I was being paranoid when I noticed my laptop. I'd left it on the coffee table, closed, with the charger coiled neatly beside it. The charger was still coiled. The laptop was still closed. But the angle was wrong, tilted slightly, like someone had picked it up and set it back down without paying attention to exactly how it had been positioned. Someone had been in my apartment while I was gone, for 45 minutes, and somehow, impossibly, they hadn't triggered a single camera. I checked the footage again, frame by frame this time. That's when I noticed it. A gap. A 3-minute window where all 4 cameras showed static, then resumed as if nothing had happened. Someone had knocked out my security system. Someone knew enough about technology to disable my cameras, enter my apartment, do whatever they wanted, and leave without a trace. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Personal. I called the police again. They came, took another report, looked at me with that same skeptical expression they'd worn the first time. One of them suggested I might want to talk to someone. A professional, he said. The stress of a break-in could do things to a person's mind, make them see threats that weren't there. I wasn't imagining this. I had footage of the cameras going to static. I had proof that someone had disabled them. Could be a technical glitch, the officer said. These wireless systems aren't always reliable. They left. I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the laptop that someone had touched, and tried to figure out what to do next. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I pushed my couch against the front door and lay there in the dark, watching the windows, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The rain started around midnight, tapping against the glass, and I found myself counting the drops to stay awake. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. Not the breath this time, something else. Tapping, soft, rhythmic, coming from the bedroom. Not the rain. This was different, deliberate, like fingers drumming against glass. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the bedroom camera. The feed showed my empty room, my empty bed, my window with the blinds closed. Nothing moving. No one there. The tapping continued. I got up from the couch, moving as quietly as I could. The sound was coming from behind the closed bedroom door, steady and patient, tap, tap, tap against the window. Whoever was out there knew I was home, knew I was awake. They were letting me know they were there. I should have called the police. I should have stayed in the living room and waited for help. But something in me snapped. All the fear, all the helplessness, all the weeks of feeling like prey. I was done hiding. I threw open the bedroom door and lunged for the window, yanking up the blinds. A face stared back at me, inches away, pressed against the glass, illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlight at the end of the alley. A man, middle-aged, pale, with deep-set eyes that caught the light and reflected it back like an animal's. He was smiling, this horrible, knowing smile, like we were sharing a private joke. I screamed, stumbled backward, hit the bed, fell. By the time I scrambled to my feet and looked at the window again, he was gone. Just darkness and rain, and the distant sound of footsteps splashing through puddles. The police found nothing. No footprints. The rain had washed them away. No fingerprints on the glass. He'd been wearing gloves. No evidence at all that he'd ever been there, except for the image burned into my memory of that face, that smile, those eyes. But the cameras in the alley behind my building, the ones the landlord had installed years ago and never bothered to maintain, those still worked. The police pulled the footage the next day. His name was Gerald Fitch, 47 years old. He'd lived in my apartment before me. Not the tenant directly before, 2 tenants before, almost 3 years ago. He'd been evicted for non-payment, had bounced around halfway houses and shelters ever since. According to his file, he had a history of mental illness, delusions, paranoid schizophrenia, a fixation on places and people that his mind had latched onto and refused to let go. He'd never stopped thinking of my apartment as his home, and somewhere in his broken mind, he'd decided that I was an intruder in his space. He'd been coming back for years, watching, waiting, letting himself in through the window he knew had never been properly secured. And now he knew that I knew about him, which meant everything was about to get worse. The police issued a warrant for Gerald Fitch's arrest, stalking, breaking and entering, criminal trespass. They told me they'd find him, that it was just a matter of time, that I should stay vigilant but try not to worry. Easy for them to say. They got to go home to apartments that hadn't been violated, beds where no one had stood breathing on their neck in the darkness. I couldn't stay there, not another night. I packed a bag and checked into a motel across town, one of those anonymous places where you pay cash and no one asks questions. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my co-workers, not my landlord, not even my parents. If Gerald was watching me, if he was tracking my movements, I needed to disappear completely. For 3 days, I lived in that motel room, ate vending machine food, watched cable news, tried to sleep in a bed that wasn't mine, in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and old cigarettes. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, my heart would seize. Every time a car pulled into the parking lot, I'd peek through the blinds expecting to see him standing there with that horrible smile. On the 4th day, the police called. They'd found Gerald. He'd been picked up trying to break into my apartment building through the basement. The landlord had finally fixed the bathroom window, so he'd tried a different route. He was in custody now, being held for psychiatric evaluation. I could go home. Home. The word felt hollow. That apartment wasn't home anymore. It was just a place where terrible things had happened, a space that would always feel contaminated by his presence. But I couldn't afford to keep paying for the motel, couldn't keep running forever. I had to go back eventually. I returned on a Sunday afternoon, when the light was brightest and the building felt most alive. Other tenants were coming and going, doing laundry, living their normal lives. I unlocked my door and stepped inside and tried to feel like this was still my space. It wasn't. The landlord had changed the locks while I was gone, installed proper latches on all the windows, even put a new deadbolt on the front door. The apartment was secure now. Objectively, Rationally, I knew that. But I could still feel him here, in the air, in the walls, in the way the shadows fell across the floor in late afternoon. He'd touched everything. He'd breathed in this space for months, maybe years. No amount of new locks could erase that. The first night back, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the living room with every light on, watching the door, watching the windows, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The apartment stayed quiet. The locks stayed secure. By morning, I was exhausted but alive, and I told myself that was enough. I fell into an uneasy routine. Work during the day, vigilance at night. The police updated me periodically. Gerald was still in custody, still being evaluated, still considered a danger to himself and others. He wouldn't be released anytime soon. I was safe. I had to keep reminding myself of that. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a detective I hadn't spoken to before. He said there had been a development in my case. He asked if I could come down to the station. Gerald had been talking. A lot. Once the medication kicked in and his mind cleared slightly, he'd started telling the doctors things. Things about my apartment. Things about me. He's been coming to that unit for almost 4 years, the detective said. We were sitting in a conference room with fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly unreal. Started right after he was evicted. At first it was just occasionally. He'd climb in when the place was empty between tenants, spend a few hours, leave. But then you moved in. I waited, not wanting to hear what came next. He became fixated on you specifically. We found a notebook in his belongings. The detective slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small, spiral-bound notebook, the kind you'd use for grocery lists. He documented everything, your schedule, your habits, what you ate, when you slept. The detective hesitated. He wrote about watching you sleep, multiple times. He described it in detail. I couldn't touch the bag, couldn't even look at it directly. How many times? Based on his notes, at least 30, maybe more. Some of the entries aren't dated. 30 times. At least 30 times this man had stood in my bedroom while I slept, watching me, breathing on me, existing inches away from my unconscious body. 30 times I'd been completely vulnerable, completely unaware, while a stranger observed me like I was an exhibit in a museum. There's something else, the detective said. His voice had gone careful, the way people's voices go when they're about to deliver bad news. Some of his entries describe touching you, your hair, your face. Nothing sexual, according to him, but I stood up so fast the chair fell over behind me. I need to leave. I understand. I'm sorry. I just thought you should know what we're dealing with. For the trial. Trial. There was going to be a trial. I was going to have to sit in a courtroom and listen to lawyers discuss how many times this man had touched my face while I slept, how many entries were in his little notebook, how detailed his observations of my life had been. I was going to have to look at him again, see that smile again, know that he was looking back at me and remembering every moment he'd spent in my bedroom. I made it to the parking lot before I threw up. Stood there in the gray afternoon light, bent over a concrete parking barrier, retching until there was nothing left, 30 times. At least 30 times. And I'd only woken up once. The trial was 6 months later. Gerald Fitch pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyers argued that his schizophrenia made him incapable of understanding that what he was doing was wrong. In his mind, they said, he was just going home, just visiting a place that belonged to him. The fact that someone else lived there now, that he was terrorizing an innocent person, didn't register in his broken brain. I had to testify. Had to sit in that witness box and describe waking up to the feeling of breath on my neck, the handprint on the window, the face pressed against the glass in the middle of the night. Gerald watched me the whole time, not with that horrible smile. The medication had dulled him somehow, made him slower and flatter, but with a kind of confused recognition. Like he knew me, but couldn't quite remember why. The jury found him not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to a state psychiatric facility for an indefinite period, subject to review every 5 years. His lawyers called it a victory. The prosecutor said it was the best outcome we could have hoped for, given the circumstances. Gerald would get treatment. He would be off the streets. He wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. I didn't feel like anyone had won. The thing about trauma is that it doesn't end when the danger ends. Gerald was locked away in a hospital 300 miles from my apartment, surrounded by doctors and security guards, and people whose job it was to make sure he never got out. I was safe. Everyone kept telling me I was safe. But every night when I closed my eyes, I felt that breath on my neck. Every morning when I woke up, I checked the room for signs that someone had been there. The fear had burrowed into me, made a home in my bones, and no amount of locked doors or therapy sessions could evict it completely. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks after the trial ended. Couldn't stay there anymore. Couldn't sleep in a bedroom where a stranger had stood over me 30 times watching me dream. I found a place on the 4th floor of a newer building, one with a doorman and security cameras and windows that didn't open wide enough for anyone to climb through. It costs twice as much as my old apartment. I don't care. I'd pay 10 times as much to feel safe again. Some nights I almost do. I've been in therapy for over a year now. My therapist specializes in trauma, has worked with survivors of stalking and home invasion and all the other violations that leave invisible scars. She's helped me understand that what I'm feeling is normal, that hypervigilance is a natural response to what I went through, that healing isn't linear and setbacks don't mean I'm broken. I believe her most of the time. The rest of the time, I lie awake in my new apartment and listen for sounds that don't belong. I still think about Gerald. Not as often as I used to, but enough. I wonder what he's doing in that hospital, whether the medication is helping, whether he still dreams about my apartment the way I dream about his face at the window. I wonder if he thinks about me, if somewhere in his fractured mind I still exist as the intruder who stole his home, the person who ruined everything by refusing to let him come and go as he pleased. The doctors say he's responding well to treatment, that with proper medication and therapy, he might eventually understand what he did was wrong, that someday, years from now, he might even be released. I try not to think about that. I try to focus on the present, on the life I'm rebuilding, on all the nights I've slept safely in my new apartment without anyone standing over my bed. But part of me knows that I'll never really be free of him. He took something from me that night, some sense of safety, some fundamental trust that the world makes sense, and I don't think I'll ever get it back. Here's what I want you to understand. This can happen to anyone. I wasn't careless. I wasn't reckless. I locked my doors and closed my blinds and did everything you're supposed to do. But I missed the bathroom window. One small vulnerability, one broken latch that I never thought to check, and it cost me months of terror and years of recovery. Check your windows, all of them. The ones you think are too small, the ones you assume no one would ever use, the ones in rooms where you never spend any time. Check them anyway. Make sure they lock. Make sure they actually latch when you close them. Make sure there's no way for anyone to slip through while you're at work or asleep or living your life. And if you ever wake up with the feeling that someone's behind you, that warm breath on your skin, that presence in the darkness, don't do what I did. Don't convince yourself it was a dream. Don't rationalize it away because the alternative is too frightening to consider. Get up, turn on the lights, search every room, every closet, every space where a person could hide. Because the worst thing isn't finding someone there. The worst thing is not finding them, going back to sleep, and letting them come back again and again while you lie there unaware. I woke up once, just once, out of 30 times. My body tried to warn me, tried to pull me out of sleep and alert me to the danger, and I ignored it. I told myself it wasn't real. It was real. It was all real. And I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I'd listened to that warning the first time. Trust your instincts. Check your locks. And never, ever convince yourself that you're imagining things, because you might not be.